Hey guys, I'm Christina Wallace.
I'm Darrah Brustein.
And we want to talk about non-traditional career paths today.
Sure do.
You have some stuff you have to say at first.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little Emory housekeeping as the member of the board here. So first, thank you for joining. As Christina said, it's really fun to be here. We are both alumni, and we'll tell you a bit more about us shortly. This webinar is one of many career opportunities that the Emory Alumni Association and the Emory Alumni Board have in affiliation with one another. So keep a lookout for what else they have to offer. And after this webinar is recorded, Emory's YouTube channel will upload the link, and you will get a distribution of the recording once it's ready as well. So we are gonna interview each other because we're gonna do that. And if you have questions, you can type them into the little chat box and we will answer them as we see them pop up. So
absolutely,
we hope that this will be a good, valuable resource, and let us know how we can be that for you.
I'm a little bit jealous that we didn't have any of this when we were students.
I know. Was video chat a thing?
I don't think so. Was YouTube even a thing?
I'm so sad. I hope so.
Okay, so Darrah, tell us a little bit about you. When were you at Emory? What did you study? And what did you kind of do on campus? Work study jobs, clubs? Like, what was your resume looking like by the time you graduated?
I'll talk to the audience. So thank you, Christina. So I graduated in 2006, which if you're a current student probably sounds like an eternity ago, but frankly feels like 10 seconds ago. And I was a double major in religion and Italian. So Uber, yeah, she doesn't even know. We're sorority sisters, so apparently things you don't talk about. And was super liberal artsy, went in though with the intention of studying photography, which at the time wasn't even a major, I was mistaken, and business, thinking I was going to be a fashion photographer and those would be like the magic resources.
I could see you as a fashion photographer.
Thank you. To get me there, and found my way in a very roundabout manner to those two courses of study, thinking if I could just learn to learn and learn how people work and tick, that I could translate that into just being a good human in the world and not necessarily into an obvious career path, which, as you'll learn, has not been the case. There's been no obvious career paths for either of us. So at Emory, like I said, we were both in a sorority. I was rush chair. I was an orientation leader. I am a white Jew who sang in the gospel choir at one point. I did a lot of things. I remember
that.
I basically did anything to like stretch me out of my comfort zone, which was probably one of the best decisions I could have made.
And what did you, like going into senior year, did you have an expectation of what you were going to do after graduation?
No, I panicked. I felt like, holy, I don't know if I can curse on here.
Unclear.
I am going to graduate and all of my friends are like going to be consultants or going off to graduate school and have this path that seems so clearly defined and laid out. Whereas I'm thinking, fashion, Emory, and sorry,
I moved to New York?
Sorry, Career Center, but I went to the Career Center and I said, I want to go into fashion. How can you help? And they thought, we know one person who's done that at Emory, and it was Kenneth Cole, so maybe you should give him a call. And I'm thinking,
did you?
Well, actually, I met him at the ATO fraternity house. But outside of that, I'm thinking, well, this isn't super helpful. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I felt very lost and confused and fearful. So.
Okay,
and
interesting.
How about you? Tell us about your history.
So I studied math and theater at Emory. A little bit like you in photography, I thought I was going to be like an aerospace engineer, which you might know is not a major at Emory. It's a major at Georgia Tech,
right
down the street. So I showed up and, there was like a relationship between the math department and engineering at Georgia Tech. If I'd wanted to do like a 5-year dual degree overachiever thing, I could have. That
also
quickly
expensive.
Also expensive. I went by the wayside, and I knew I wanted to major in math, and then I'd come from a performing arts background. I'm a classical musician on 3 instruments, and kind of got pulled into the theater department, and ended up double majoring. I was a theater director, and so all through college, I worked as an assistant stage manager. It was my work study job with Theater Emory on campus, which is an equity theater company. And then I ended up doing a ton of freelance work in the Atlanta theater community at the Alliance and Georgia Shakespeare back when they still existed. Rest in peace. And Actors Express and just theater and like all of these great theater companies. And so I spent more time doing theater than math, which was kind of unexpected. And then got to about this point in senior year. And my other job all through college was as the assistant director of music and a staff chorister, a staff singer at First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta, downtown. So I made all of my money as an artist all through college, which was kind of interesting, and got to kind of about December, and everyone had their consulting offers and their banking offers, or they were, you know, finishing up their applications for grad school, and I had literally no idea what I was going to do after I graduated.
Quit school.
And I never went to the Career Center. I kind of assumed I was going to go down this theater arts path. And I assumed that like I already had that network. That was going to be my world. And so kind of had fallen into, I think they had just launched it maybe a year or two before, the Rosemary McGee Arts Associate Fellowship at the Schwartz Center, which had opened while I was a student there. And it was a 1-year arts management rotational fellowship. It basically bought me a post-grad year. So I got paid and I got to work, but I still got to be on campus. I still got to sing in concert choir, which I sang in all the way through undergrad. I got to take a class in the math department. I was TAing in the theater department, and it bought me a 5th year to kind of get my stuff together, because I too had absolutely no clue what comes after graduation. And I came from a family, my mom was a secretary, my grandfather built cars on the assembly line for General Motors. I came from a family that also just didn't understand this world, and like the notion of let's call up your uncle or I have a family friend, it didn't come into play. So it was very much like, oh, post-college, there's a thing called a job and I have to figure that part out. It's a little terrifying.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there's a couple takeaways. Like one is find the opportunities that may be a little less traditional to like leap in, even if you need that space. Mm-hmm. Another is perhaps not to chase down the same path that everyone else is on because it seems safe,
yes,
or available,
yes,
to like really start listening and tuning into yourself and figuring out what might my path look like, even if I'm not exactly sure. But those little cues of like enthusiasm or excitement for something versus like dread are really good telltale signs.
They are. And I think the other thing that played out a little bit, I don't think I even intentionally realized this, was just doing what I was interested in and good at in the theater world, particularly in Atlanta theater. You don't specialize really in one thing. I wasn't just a director. I was a director and a stage manager, and I built sets. I was a carpenter at Georgia Shakespeare for 3 summers, and I hung lights at the Alliance. And like I did a little bit of everything. And at first it was for free or to build relationships. And then they started offering me money for it. And it kind of built a skill set and a resume by the time I graduated that even though it wasn't really a full-time job, it did provide me with this kind of portfolio of earning opportunities that I could piece something together while I was still trying to get it figured out.
Well, what I love about that, and I also relate to, is the transferability of experiences. Mm-hmm. So for me, the way I sold my degree to my parents, who were fortunately paying for my tuition, was, hey, if I wanted to go into fashion and I want to do that, then let me learn Italian because I already speak French and English, and those are the fashion languages. Yeah. So it's literally finding these ways to transmute the things that may not seem obvious and blend it into something else. So for you to say, I had all of these varying experiences in theater, this is how I can apply them on a resume when I'm applying somewhere else, which is how I felt. Like my career ended up starting in sales for a fashion company. But what I didn't realize at the time was following the thing that excited me, like doing recruitment chair stuff for ADPi, was how much I loved working with people in those ways, and really that I learned to sell. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, great. Now I'm going to use those skills I learned to sell people on our sorority and bring them to this clothing line and take it there. And it's really about using those creative muscles to figure out, how do I make this transferable and applicable somewhere else? Even if on paper you're like, no one's going to get that. That's not going to make sense. It totally can make sense. And actually you'll be better off when you're like, hey, look at how actually I can transfer this thing rather than fit in one little box.
That is such a true thing too, because I went into the arts world. My first job post-Emory was at the Metropolitan Opera here in New York. I kind of decided I was going to move to New York and do the arts thing, and sent out 50 resumes. I got 1 interview, and it was at the Met, and like, thank God they hired me. And spent 2 years in the rehearsal department there, which was sort of a mix between like stage management, operations management, contracts, diva management. And then went off to business school. And when I was at business school, I was doing my MBA at Harvard, and I was kind of like, how do I translate? I've done 3 years of work experience pre-MBA, and it's all in the arts world. Literally every job except for 1 summer as a waitress on my resume is arts. how do I do anything non-arts related post MBA? And I sat down with one of my classmates, and she's like, just explain to me what you did in the arts. Don't give me the words of like opera, but tell me what you did all day long. And I started explaining my experiences to her, and she said, oh, that's operations management. I was like, oh, that's a phrase I can use, right? And so she helped me actually translate my entire resume into the lingo of the world I wanted to go into. And it gave me, and we practiced sort of how do I tell these anecdotes to compare them and say, this is client management, not diva management. Totally. And here's how I can apply this to a consulting framework or to entrepreneurship or whatever. I ended up writing a piece just a couple months ago about how my theater degree was actually the best training for entrepreneurship I think there is, and how like that skill set was actually so much more relevant than I ever would have expected going into it. So it's really finding the translation, but you have to do that, right? You can't expect the person.
Yeah, you can't expect someone to
make
read
leaps
between the lines.
Exactly.
Like people have the shortest attention spans we've ever had in human history. So to expect them to even read every word on your resume is a joke. So
to do that though, you have to kind of have those mentors or those relationships to help you understand the world that maybe you want to go into from the world you're starting in. You now have built one of the legs of your kind of career path around networks and networking in a way that doesn't make you or the other people feel like weird and transactional. Tell us a little bit more about what that is and how you kind of fell into this.
Sure. So I want to do a quick fill in the gap between Emory's sales job in fashion, getting laid off, taking an assistant job for a woman who was a lot of things. She had a show on CNN. She was an author. She was a real estate investor and had like a lot of information products. And I came in after a layoff or two being like, I just want to learn everything. And then this is early recession, lost my job there, lost another job at a high-end home audio video company because of the recession. So suffered 3 or 4 layoffs in the course of about 3 years after I graduated and really felt super, super lost. I'm losing track of your question. And as I like then moved into the world and I realized for me, and this is not going to be for everybody, that we were told a traditional story. It was go to school, in our case, a great school, get good grades, get a job happily ever after, la, la, la. I wasn't finding that to work for me. And I always knew in my heart of hearts I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but that was a word that I never really knew. I just knew I wanted to have a business. And then I kept being told, hey, you're a millennial. Every millennial is just impatient. Don't do that. Don't wait around. And I was thinking, I'm actually not impatient. I've been like giving my everything to these companies and they just don't have the money anymore because we're in a really tough economic time. And so I made a decision to take a leap and start my own businesses. My first in the payment processing space. So again, you're seeing there's like stuff everywhere, totally different industries. And that's cool because ultimately, like you said, what's the underpinning piece? And for me, it was people, it was connection. It was how do I make an impact in some way to like fix or fill a space or a gap in a market with my skills and gifts, which are connection and people and connecting the dots. So that goes exactly to your question of how does this networking piece come into it? And so as a friend from Emory, who was your year, and actually Marcella in our story, shout out Marcella, and she had returned from law school and she came back to Atlanta and she thought, this is the first time in my life that I've not had a built-in social network. And I don't know how to make a friend as a young adult. Like you don't go to a bar and be like,
it's hard.
Yo, Christina, you seem really cool. Do you want to be my friend? And yeah, it's really hard and it's really awkward. And as you alluded to about these like awkward, transactional, tedious environments for networking, that's unfortunately what exists and what most people think of networking as is what can I get for myself? Not what can I learn? How curious can I be? What value can I add for other people? Which like, if you take nothing else away from what I say, I hope those are the 3 things you take away. When you meet people in this world, it should always be, what can I learn? What can I add? How can I contribute? Listening more than you talk, like all of that stuff. And so when she said that to me and I thought everywhere I thought to send her, she was either going to get hit on because it was a big single scene. It was going to be a business card exchange sales opportunity for someone else. It was going to be everyone who was her parents' age or everyone in one specific industry. And I thought, where's the place you can just go interact and intersect friendship and business where so it's professional, but it's also fun and laid back and you can be yourself. And frankly, real business relationships come out of friendships. So again, another takeaway is networking really is just another word for relationships. And more dissected, it's friendships. So anytime you go into a situation, you're thinking this is networking versus this is, no. Like they're relationships and they're people, and like
put your business cards away.
Right, like Christina and I never could have guessed that we'd run into each other in a lot of professional circles now, and that we were just like having a good time being friends back in the day, and now they get to intersect and commingle, and it's super fun and great. But it's because we have the same perspective, that you just go into the world being a useful, helpful, curious person, and stuff comes out of that.
And you pay into the relationships before you expect to pay back.
I always say at least 2x of value given to value extracted. So like give, ask, give, ask. I got cut off there, but you get it. So yeah, it's always be looking to give and contribute, and not in a way that's manipulative or really looking to generate something for yourself. It really needs to come from a genuine, authentic place. Yeah.
So you built this amazing networking community.
Thank you.
It's
called Network Under 40. It's in Atlanta. It's also in 5 other cities. Yeah, we're all over the U.S. We serve 30,000 people now, and we're growing. We focus on second-tier cities because I believe younger audiences I see it statistically, they're moving into these places and looking for places to connect. So like we're in New York right now. I live here part-time while I live in Atlanta the rest. And in New York, you can like throw a quarter and there's somewhere to go and meet someone very easily who are all fantastic people. It's a little bit harder, frankly, when you're in a city that you're driving and people live in silos and buckets. So I think something you and I would agree upon is it's super important to be investing in the network that you have at any stage, and don't always think that you, like, A, never wait until you actually need something, and B, be investing in those relationships now with no expectation of return. Like I always say, there's a karmic retribution to giving and to your relationships. So if Christina came to me and was like, hey, I need you to help me do X, Y, Z, and I did, which I would hope to, then I would never sit here and be like, Christina owes me, let me like write that in my, no, not at all. Because I know from experience, I also know, thanks to like Adam Grant's Give and Take book, which highly recommend. He's a professor at Wharton. It gives evidence to what I know, and you know anecdotally, that those who are givers in the world win. They succeed the most. And it's not because they're keeping count. That's a matcher. And certainly don't be a taker. That reputation will build, and people will know that about you. So the more you, and it's probably hard if you're young in your career, you're in college and you're thinking to yourself, what do I have to give? What do I have to give? You've got plenty to give. Like peer to peer, just start asking like what people are up to, like what are their most exciting things coming up? What are the biggest challenges they're facing? And find ways to plug in. Like you just don't realize the power of your network, from your family to the people you grew up with, to the people you're in classes with now, the people you intern with. This is your network, and be pouring into that investing. So I want to know about your experience in translating, because you said even earlier that you built your network in the theater space and you thought that was going to be it. And then you did a bit of a turn and went to Harvard, and then, you know, you've done a lot of other interesting things. So tell me about how you grew your network and translated it, and maybe if there's any lessons learned in that process.
Yeah, so I did. I had like kind of this huge 180. I went off to business school, not necessarily intending to lead the arts. Actually, all of my application essays were about how I was looking at the people who had the jobs I wanted. The head of the Metropolitan Opera, the head of the Kennedy Center, kind of all these top jobs all went to men who either had MBAs or had been CEOs in a for-profit business setting. And I realized, particularly as I was looking at, you know, I'm pretty young, and I'm looking at kind of the pipeline of talent at the Met, and there's no upward mobility. There's no movement. There isn't any kind of professional development program. There's no opportunities to raise your hand and ask for stretch assignments. There isn't really a way to ask for promotion. It's sort of, they explicitly said, you don't get promoted until someone dies or retires. And I looked above me, and everyone was kind of in their 50s and healthy, and I was like, well, this could take a while. And I was impatient. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to be challenged. And, you know, I had learned kind of in the hard way a couple of times in my 2 years there that they didn't want new. They wanted exactly what they had. And they just wanted me to execute on exactly what already existed. And that was sort of the first time for me that I realized that one of the core values that I was looking for in a career was innovation, was building new, and was looking for how do I solve problems in a different way. And sort of executing on existing was not interesting to me. question.
I want to stop because I think there's a really key nugget here, which is that you stopped and you did the self-analysis to figure out what are the things that are most critical and important to me as I design a career path, regardless of industry or otherwise. Is there anything else you want to share about that?
The other thing related to that, and I didn't even know to ask this question when I was starting, is the place that I'm working, is it growing? Because if it's not growing, you don't get to grow. And in fact, the Met was shrinking, and it continues to shrink. They're doing layoffs, and salaries are getting cut, and people are asking to take on 3 jobs and not getting promoted to do that. And it made me realize that if the place I was at wasn't growing, I was never going to get more opportunities. And so industry agnostic, if I had to be looking for places that were growing as fast as I wanted to grow.
So good.
So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to business school. I don't know anyone with an MBA. I don't even know what you've learned in business school, but I'm pretty sure that the people who have money make the decisions in the world, and I want to know what they know.
It's true. It's true.
So I went on to my MBA, and the financial crisis hit my 3rd week of school.
Wow.
And there were no jobs, and kind of career services there were freaking out. And so all of a sudden, Harvard, which up to this point, Stanford Business School had been the entrepreneurship school. Harvard Business School was like consulting, finance, more traditional general management, was all of a sudden very interested in entrepreneurship. It was like, create your own job, guys, because
they don't exist. Yeah.
And there was this big push for entrepreneurship, and I had never experienced this. This was like, I come from such a blue collar, risk-averse Midwestern family. They were farmers before they were, assembly line workers. The notion of building your own business and all the risk that comes with that was so new and scary. And yet, when I looked under the covers, it was like, this is exactly the same as building a play, right? You have an idea, it's on paper, doesn't exist yet, you get a team together, you inspire them to all work toward the same goal, you make something out of nothing, the first version kind of sucks, you kind of fix it, and you hope it's all being held together when the curtain goes up. And I was like, this is such a fun way to apply what I loved about theater in a completely different context. But let's try it and let's learn it and see what happens. So I went down the entrepreneurship path. I did one very long year in management consulting and was very sure that was not the path for me.
But good for you for trying.
Good for me for trying. I wanted,
knock them off.
Exactly. I wanted the experience, and I knew this was not a fit. But what was interesting, it was a great learning opportunity. There was a professional development. There were 3 professional development rituals or experiences they give you while you're in your first year. And 2 of them were completely forgettable, but the 3rd one was executive communication and presence. And it was one-on-one with this dude, and you sit down and you're bringing in a presentation that you've either given recently or about to give, and they film you, and you pretend that you're sitting in a boardroom and you're giving it to the client. And I did this whole thing, and he comes back and he turns the video camera off and he sits down next to me and he says, "You need to leave this job immediately." I was like, I really don't think I was that bad. Like, maybe it was a rough day, but like, can we not overreact here?
Right.
He said, no, that's not it. I've been doing this training for first-year consultants at this firm for like 20 years across all of North America's offices. And you are the best I've ever seen do this role. You will not get to do this skill at this firm for at least the next 6 years. As a partner, you will get to use the skill all the time. But over the next 6 years, now that they know that you have this, you've checked that box, they're never going to give you the opportunity to do that. They're going to make you round out the rest of these skills, which is fine. You could round them out. But you're over-indexing on this skill. You should find an opportunity to do that all day long. I was like,
that's an incredible manager who's not like, let me hoard this woman, let me set her free and give her that opportunity.
It really was. And it gave me the permission to leave much faster than I probably would have given myself. So I left at the end of that year and I went and started my own company in the fashion space. I know. And kind of went down this whole rabbit hole and made a lot of mistakes in my first company. I had a great co-founder, and we raised $1 million in angel and venture capital, and we kind of got this brand off from nothing into something, and we sold clothes and we were out there, and then in the end, the whole thing failed and we had to shut down. And we wrote a whole case study on our failure, which we go back and teach every year at HBS because we think teaching about failure and talking about failure is so important, and learning from that.
Failure is good.
Failure is good. I mean,
I honestly believe that you don't fail unless you quit.
Exactly.
Like you've got it, like you just keep going. It's like another thing on your path that's like, nope, go that way. And you're like, okay, got it.
But I think that was such a huge moment for me because it was literally the first time in my whole life I failed at anything.
Which probably is relatable to a lot of the audience. Like we all went to Emory. Emory people are pretty good at stuff. It's okay because honestly, if you never hit those points, I don't think you're trying hard enough.
And for me, the stretching is the important part. I didn't know the edge of my abilities. I didn't know where the whole thing fell apart for me, right? And kind of where my stress level hit the roof or where I didn't know how to manage through uncertainty. And it was a really important moment for me to say like, oh, that's where I have to learn. Everything else, I've sort of been coasting. It hasn't been that hard. And that was really hard. And so going through that failure and deciding like, okay, that sucked. I mean, let's be clear. I stayed in bed for 3 weeks and watched all 7 seasons of The West Wing and talked to no one. It's a great rebound show. But then was kind of like, okay, I want to stay in startups. I want to stay in New York. I like early stage. It sort of goes back to that theater thing that I love, which is taking nothing and making something versus taking something and making it bigger. And now I have to figure out what I do because I've been an opera manager, a consultant, and a fashion CEO. Like literally, what does that translate to into a job search? And so I went and asked for coffee. To your point of asking for something only after you've given in. I had this amazing network that I've been helping out for several years at this point, and I said, okay, guys, I now need you. I need you in a real way.
And they were probably super receptive.
And they were like, of course. Whatever it is, like I'm there. I did 70 coffee chats in 30 days. I literally just emailed everyone and said, I need your help. And I asked them all the same 3 questions, which was, what do you come to me for? Like, what do I do? What's my thing, my secret sauce that you ask me to come and help you with? When have you seen me happiest? And how does that translate, or what does that translate into in terms of like skills into job descriptions? Like where do you match that up? And coming out of that, it was a resounding sort of similar thing. They came to me for storytelling and for positioning and kind of how do you connect ideas? They saw me happiest when I was in control of my calendar, which was so crucial, because I do all these other things. I'm never just one thing. I've always had side hustles, and that makes me happy. So I have to be in control of my calendar. When I was in consulting, I wasn't in control, and I wasn't able to do those things. And where that translated to, for many of them, they said, general management or like a BD, business development, or kind of marketing role. Early stage New York. And I was like, great, now I kind of have a triangulation and I can go from there. So I ended up following that into a early stage job at Startup Institute as an executive there, then went and started something inside a museum. And now I run business development and marketing for a fast growing kind of early stage tech company. So kind of following that zigzag really helped. But I think the learning kind of what are the things that make me happy, separate from industry, separate from function, what are the attributes I'm looking to do all day long? And having that network to say, okay, reflect back to me what you've seen from me, because right now I'm feeling really lost. Right. And I think that in particular is a thing that you could use even now in college to go to your friends or your professors and say like, I think it's hard for us to know our strengths because they seem so easy. They seem so natural to us.
You take them for granted.
You take them for granted. And I don't think if someone hadn't told me, you're really good on stage telling stories, there's no way I would have an entire portion of my career that's now public speaking and giving speeches and kind of being a storyteller, whether it's on a podcast or on a stage or whatnot. I just thought that was something I do. But for many people, that's terrifying.
I have the exact same experience where it was a friend from Emory right after I graduated who said, you are exceptional at connecting people and convening and being a curator of environments and people. And I thought, doesn't everyone do that? And he's like, no, people suck at maintaining relationships and bringing people together and all that stuff. But you're exactly right. It takes the reflection back. Like I always say, you can't see the spot on which you stand. Yeah. And you need someone else to see your shadow for you and say, these are the things you need to know. And then the other part of what you said, we also have this in common because I have an exercise I share with people to ask your network to reflect back on you exactly like you did. And then secondarily, it's doing what actually the Career Center taught me. This was my primary takeaway from them, which is my top 10 non-negotiables when I was looking for a job. And you could apply it to whatever it is you're designing in your career, where when you realize, okay, I need to control my calendar, and you put like whatever that means, or how you translate that, or this amount of time interacting with people, or I wear this thing, or I commute this way, or I do administrative stuff this much, or I travel this much, or I don't, or, you know, the pay is this much, or the benefits are this, like whatever the absolute most important things to you are for your career and your daily life, because frankly, especially if some of you have only had like part-time jobs or internships, you spend the majority of your waking hours in a working environment. So if you're miserable with your commute, if you hate putting on a suit every day,
if you hate your coworkers,
your coworkers suck, if your boss is an asshole, like that's gonna matter, and that's going to infiltrate every other arena and portion of your life. So it's critical that you have this barometer to go to when you're looking at a lot of jobs. And some are gonna seem really sexy on paper and very unsexy in practice.
Oh my goodness.
Or they're going to seem really unsexy on paper and the best in practice.
Credit card processing?
Yeah, I mean, I own a credit card processing business. And I did that right after fashion. Like, couldn't feel less sexy, but had the translatable everything of I got to work with people. I got to learn all the time. I got to be making my own hours. I got to be interacting with all these business owners. Like, I was just constantly learning and with people and helping fill a need that they had. So for me, it hit on these top 3 major things that were important. And then I was building a business. So it was like dings across the board, check, 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 check.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have necessarily thought that, because going into my career, I thought, well, the thing that I'm most passionate about right then was fashion, when really that was great as a hobby.
Right.
It didn't need to be my career. It actually ruined it for me as a career. So I would say, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, that we are a bit inundated with the idea of follow your passion. Where I actually think the thing you do can become your passion.
That's true.
Like the thing you put your energy in, you can get so jazzed about. Whereas before, from the outside, you're like, that thing, when really often the industry has nothing to do with it. It's the actual tactical role.
That's exactly the crucial thing, right? If my passion is the arts, that doesn't mean anything in terms of like a job. I was miserable at the Metropolitan Opera. I love it as an attendee. I love opera. I'm so glad it exists. I never want to work there again. I'm sorry. I love you, the Met, but I never want to work there again. And it ruined it for me for a while. I had to take a break before I could go back. And I think if I was honest, my passion was creating things. And I can create things in the business world. I can create things in the arts world. But taking an idea and making that and getting to go from the nothing to the something, the 0 to 2, that was my passion. But you don't really ever break it down that way. I think especially in college, when you're kind of like, well, who am I going to be when I grow up? You define that by industry or maybe by title, but you don't really understand the like, how do I have to learn and what am I going to do? What are the actions that I want to do with every day, 5 days a week or more, for a while? I think the other thing that I probably overstressed on and it's sort of was less important than it needed to be, was like, your first job doesn't define who you are. It doesn't even define who your next 5 years are. It literally is your first job. And like, stress less about the first thing you do out of college. I would almost just say, get a job. Because one of the things that I've learned very clearly, especially through my failures, is taking any action is better than taking no action, even if the action is wrong, because now you know that that's not what you're supposed to do, but you have that information and now you can pivot and adjust. Sitting in the despair and the paralysis of like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to ask for a lot of advice, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to stress about it. I'm going to avoid it. That you're in the same position whenever you stop being in that moment of paralysis and you haven't made any forward motion. Like, literally taking any action is better than none. So getting any job and then using that to say, oh, turns out I hate working under fluorescent lights. And now I know this. I hate doing any job that requires me to wear business casual. I mean, I never want to commute in my car ever again, right? Like, doing it tells you new things and then you can pivot for the next thing.
Totally, data points.
It's so important. It's so important to figure out. So here's my big question for you. You still have your credit card processing company. you've got your network under 40, you write for a bunch of outlets, you have I would call them side hustles, but that sounds so diminutive. When was the moment when you realized this narrative of there is a job was wrong or just didn't fit you, and that the life you wanted to build was much more of a portfolio of things? When was that moment you were like, oh, this isn't a bug, it's actually a feature of the life that I've chosen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought of it quite like that. But the first catalyst was in losing job after job after job, subsequently always around this time of year, right before the holidays, where you're like, well, Merry Christmas to you too. And I started thinking like, okay, so there is none of this loyalty that past generations with pensions used to have. And the whole idea of jumping off the cliff to work for yourself didn't feel like much of a cliff. I felt like I was already in the ravine. So at that point I thought, well, let me just start something, like you said, like just do something and at least test this hypothesis and see what would happen. And for me, I spent probably 6 or so years building my first company and working quite hard and stressing and like doing all the things that it takes to like really get a company profitable and off the ground and to a good place. But then had read a book early in my career, The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, which talks about when you have a business, getting you out of the cog in the wheel and basically creating a job for yourself and instead creating systems and putting people in the roles so that you can step out. And so that was always my goals. It was to be able to step out of my business to free up time and to have the financial freedom to choose how I spent my time. So once, and fortunately that was a business that allowed me to do that, which I didn't know going into it, but backed my way in, which was again, like sort of a happy accident. And so at that point, I literally just had the friend I talked about say, I have this problem with making new friends. And I thought, I have a solution for you because I love to bring people together and I see a need. And I didn't think I'm going to start another business. I just thought I'm going to help my friend. So I started throwing these events and charging a minimal amount just so people would commit. Because actually I sat on Emory's Young Alumni Board at the time. And as a volunteer, ran all the Atlanta Young Alumni events. So I already knew how to do it. So I was like, well, let me just do this. And I know from that too, that when you do free things, people don't value it. They don't show up. But if you charge $10, then they value it enough to say, I'm going to prioritize it. I'm going to be there and I'm going to try and make this valuable and worthwhile. And then people kept saying, do it and do it and do it. And I was like, oh, well, if people keep wanting it, then I'm going to keep doing it. And so it wasn't me going and being like, I need to do more, but I was like, hey, I've created more time. My brain is sort of on autopilot here. I know what I'm doing, much like you've expressed, where I was like, I'm on this constant need to learn and do more and contribute more in the world, sometimes to a fault, I'll admit. But so I let that happen. And then same thing with writing. I had someone in my network reach out to me and say, we saw that you've written some guest posts for a couple big outlets. My editor at Entrepreneur is looking for a writer. Do you want to write? And I thought, here's a chance for me to flex a muscle I don't use enough, which is writing, and I really enjoy, which also is super undervalued and super important.
So important.
It gives me a chance to create a platform for other people to give light to their voice and their stuff that I think needs a spotlight. And frankly, it was a credibility opportunity for me too. And so I thought, well, let me do that. And that parlayed into Forbes and Thrive Global and all these other places. But I got to call the shots and say, this is how often I'm willing to write in exchange for what I think the value is for me and the people I'm doing it for. And so you say it's a portfolio, which you're right. And frankly, you and I in this non-traditional career path, none of these things make sense. Like we don't, like if you write, you're a podcaster, you're a startup maven, you're a business development person, like you have this interesting background. And you and I both don't love the question, what do you do or what's your job title? Because not only does it not define us, nor do we want it to, but it's a very hard question to answer when you wear a lot of hats. So I just kept doing this like basic foundational thing of chasing the things that excited me so long as it didn't impede or hamper the things that I already had created and cared about. So yeah, I mean, ultimately to your point, when you develop and design a career and your life, they are not separable items. They are one and the same. It's really important to figure out, how do you want to spend your time? Who do you want to spend your time with? What are the values that you have and how do you integrate them into your career in a way that, you know, when you look back, like I always look at it, there's a book called The Road to Character. Have you read this? And it talks about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues. And that
such a good book.
Yeah, we often as a culture position ourselves to value the resume virtues. Like, what are your list of accolades and accomplishments? Like if you're an entrepreneur, how many employees do you have?
How much money have you raised?
Yeah, or how much did you exit for? And what was that number? whatever these big things are that really don't matter, because when you think to your deathbed, as weird as it sounds, what's going to matter? And for me, that's how much I contributed in this world, how much value I added, what my relationships were like, and that people would speak nicely of me, and like that I was a great person in the ways that would matter. Not in, here's my resume. And I think it's a really important thing to consider as you're building your career, and also too to realize, to your point earlier about not caring much about what your first job was, I at the time thought, oh, it's so great that at like a party I can say I work in fashion and that's really sexy. And people are like, ooh, I want to hear more about that, versus I work in electronic payments and people are like, snooze, I don't care. I'm going to leave. This is so boring. I don't understand. But then I came to realize this, even too with failures, because I've had plenty of them as well. People don't care. They are paying 1% of the attention that you actually think they're paying to you. And it's super selfish and narcissistic of us to keep thinking that people are paying that much attention. So don't worry about it. Like, make every mistake you want to make, try everything you want to try, do the stuff that your friends aren't doing if you really want to do it, because they don't care. Like,
also, to your point, if you're the type of person who's introducing yourself at a cocktail party by your job title, then maybe it would be less fun to say I'm in electronic payment processing. But if you're the type of person to say I'm so much more than just my job, and I don't want to talk about my job, or I don't want to only define myself in my job, and say, look, I'm a storyteller, I'm a connector, I am an entrepreneur. What do you do, right? Like, you can decide how you frame yourself. And I think, you just put up a new website that uses this fantastic phrase, life by design, not by default. And I think that's such a perfect way to describe what you have chosen thoughtfully to put together in this lifestyle and this kind of career path that you've built. And I think that is, it's such an interesting phrase, because it reminds me of Clay Christensen teaches one of his theories. I don't remember which book it's in, but he taught it in the class that I took with him at Harvard, around emergent versus deliberate strategy. And it's an idea that we use a lot at Bionic, because we work with big companies that are trying to be innovative. And the idea of deliberate strategy is, in an existing world where all the factors are known, you're here, you want to go there, you put together a plan for getting from here to there. In a world where things are not finished and they're unknown and they're changing, and you're here and roughly you want to get up there-ish. If you try to do a straight line path, all of these pieces are moving, you're going to end up like over here, especially if you start down that path and then you never revisit the strategy, right? You close your eyes and you just start executing. And the idea of an emergent strategy is, I have roughly an idea where I'm going. I have roughly an idea of the environment that I'm in, and I'm going to make a few steps forward and then reassess and recalibrate and make a few more steps forward and reassess and even reassess if that's where I still want to go. Right. And I think it's that design choice that says, here are the values that I want in my life. Here are the skills that I have. Here are the things that I want to learn. This is the lifestyle I want. You live a lifestyle that allows you to be multi-city, like on a regular basis, you and your boyfriend and the friends that you've built around that. That's a design choice. And if you were to take a desk job, that would not be an option, right? So really kind of putting together the bigger version of, what is it that I want? Not how much money in my bank account or what kind of house I want or, what my title is, but like, what is the experience of my life? And then you start here, which as a senior in college, you might feel like is so far from that life, but you just take a first couple of steps. You get that first job and you learn a little bit. And you say, mate, for me, Atlanta wasn't the right fit. New York was. Let's try New York. We don't actually know if New York is. Let's go and give it a shot. And then it turns out New York was a good fit. Okay, let's recalibrate a little bit more. It wasn't the arts. Maybe it's in entrepreneurship, and recalibrate more. So I think it's that piece. And then to your point of like the instability of the economy that you graduated into, I was a year earlier than you and got to ride out the financial crisis at a business school, which is purely by luck. But I felt that instability very clearly, and my family did not have any financial resources to help out, so there was no safety net. When my business failed, I had negative dollars in my bank account, and it was terrifying. So that, I think, instability for me translated into multiple income streams as a way to hedge, as a way to ensure that I had a little bit more safety and stability. And for me, it really wasn't until maybe 2 years ago that I realized this. I've never just had one job ever. But I realized that that wasn't ever going away. It wasn't a point where like, oh, well, now that I'm the vice president of growth at this tech company, now I'll stop doing all these side projects because now I'm on the path. For me, it was the realization of, I want a podcast. I want to speak. I want to write. I want to coach.
Right. And want to be a multi-hyphenate.
I want to be a multi-hyphenate, and putting all of those pieces together makes me better at each one of them. And collectively, that's the life that I've chosen to build. And what that means in the trickle down of like how I manage my time, or where I'm able to travel, or how I kind of put those pieces together, I have to be very deliberate, and I have to design that. It's harder to live this life than to pick a path and kind of go toward the straight and narrow.
Completely.
But neither of us would have been happy.
Right. If that's a fit for some people. It's certainly not for us.
It's not for us.
Yeah.
So like the awkward part about being a misfit is that you're gonna have to put more effort into. Have you read that book, The Misfits Manifesto?
No,
oh my God, it's so good. The
Getting
Misfits Manifesto. It just came out.
Recommendations. I love it.
It's such a great book because it's basically like, we're misfits. We're never going to fit in.
Right.
But like, that's okay.
It's great.
And you can translate that into all different ways. And this is how you create the world that you do fit into, instead of feeling like the misfit in the default world.
I love that.
We have like 10 minutes left, just keeping an eye on that. But we have no questions.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, we have 10 minutes. Yeah, I do love one of the things, a lot of things you said, but one in particular around sort of the Buddhist idea of non-attachment to the goals and the outcomes. Because I think that's important. And I used to get really caught up in this, where I'd say, my goal is X, Y, Z. And then somewhere along the way, I'm like, I don't actually want that anymore. Yeah. But I was like, but I said I was going to do it. Yeah. So I'm not a quitter. So I'm going to do it. But really, it's exactly that you sort of stop and take stock and inventory. And you're like, is this still working? What needs to change or pivot or readjust? And then keep it moving. And I think that's super important to realize too, that you may go into something thinking, this is exactly it. And then you're like, man, I like really claimed, like I put my flagpole down and I claimed it. And then you're like, it's okay. It's not what it was and what I intended it for it to be. But like we talked about, it's data point, and I'm going to keep moving.
Well, I think there's such a danger, especially for overachievers who go to great schools like Emory, to your point of the resume approach to life, that in the absence of knowing what I want, it's easy to just accumulate accomplishments. And at the very least, that feels like progress. So one year I decided to run 13 half marathons in the year, not because I particularly love running, and in fact, I kind of hate running, but because I got a medal at the end of every one of them, and it was a thing that at least I knew I was making progress on. Right. And I did. I ran all 13. The 13th was actually a full marathon, which I hated. I ran 2 more full marathons after that, and it was awful.
But it's Chi-Chi.
Nice. The preference for accomplishment allowed me to ignore the fact that I actually was feeling really lost, and it allowed me to not deal with that.
Yeah, it's the trap of busyness. And I've done this too, where you're just moving, but you're kind of aimless. Yeah. So like you said, you're putting like false idols in the place of what you really want to be working towards, which goes to a really important point about boundaries and saying no. That it's really easy to be like, oh, there's this shiny object and this shiny object, and I'm going to chase after this. You want to check? We got questions suddenly pouring in.
So many questions.
Wow.
Hey, turns out we just need to give you permission.
I know.
What advice can you give to those who want to be entrepreneurs but are not sure how to navigate through business or networking?
Well, this is great from Chi-Chi, who's literally like a queen of networking. So have never, wait, I'm sorry.
It's the one up.
Why don't you take it while I'm rereading it?
So the thing is, for me, when I was starting in the entrepreneur world, it was after business school, and I had moved back to New York, and I didn't really know anyone in New York in the entrepreneurship world because my network was all in the opera world. And the first thing I did was get on Twitter. Because the great thing about Twitter has many flaws, I will give you that, but the great thing about Twitter is that you can decide whose conversations you want to overhear, and then you start seeing them having conversations with each other. And then you add value. You join in, you add a comment, or you add a link, or you send a question, and you can start having conversations with people who you don't know in real life. And I built so many relationships with other entrepreneurs, with investors, with advisors, people I just admired online, and then I met them in real life, and now they're actually my friends. It's a very 21st century world.
Totally.
But
people are so accessible.
They're super accessible, and it's a way to, I think people want to be helpful, but they need to know how to be helpful.
Exactly.
So if you call someone up to say, can I pick your brain? The answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
Please
don't
never
ever ask
write
that question.
Email. Do not write that email. You wrote a great piece on this that I hope you tweet out and everyone can follow.
Sarah at Emory, maybe you can share this piece on asking people and responding to the question.
Do not ask
to
pick your brain.
Yeah.
But what you can ask is, I see that you have read this thing or written that thing or you did this cool thing. I connected with it for the following reasons.
Demonstrate that you did your homework.
Mm-hmm.
Flatter them.
Give them a reason why it matters to you, and then make a very specific ask. Will you give me your advice on this topic? Happy to hop on a call or take your email in response.
Don't ask them to show up for lunch. Don't assume buying them coffee is a worthwhile exchange.
I do not need your coffee. I can buy my own coffee. But finding ways to ask for specific pieces of advice from people that you
can't Google.
Advise, yes. People that you look up to starts to build that relationship. Right. And to Darrah's point of like, give before you get, you might think you have nothing to offer, but you always have something to offer.
Right.
So it could be I can introduce you to this particular network of people I know. I can get you in front of college students. It could be
I have 5 intern hours a week available. Do you need help?
I'm really good at copywriting. Do you want some help with whatever? Like, find a thing that you can offer.
Maybe I can assemble a focus group of college students if that would be helpful to you.
Exactly. Like, find a way to offer something so that it doesn't just feel like a one-way.
The chances are they're not going to take you up on it, but just your extension of that.
It goes such a long way.
Intention, right. And in your point too, so I'll plug something that Emory would kill me if I didn't plug, which is Emory Connects, which is basically an Emory specific LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn is phenomenal, and also think you should be spending time there if there's specific industries or people or job titles that you want to get to know more, and there's ways for you to find who in your network knows them and ask for introductions. It's always the best way to get warmly introduced to someone rather than try and like cold call someone. This is why Emory built Emory Connects. So get a profile on Emory Connects, link up with us, link up with other people, and get to know them that way in the vein that we're talking about. So you don't feel like you're starting from nowhere. Always having kinship and or familiarity with someone. So saying we both went to Emory, or we both were in the same sorority, even if it's at a different school, or you're in this industry and it's where I'm looking to go, and here's what I've learned, and here's my one question, like Christina said. Those are really great starting points.
And I think that's relevant to our next question from Blake around someone who's over 45 and is trying to kind of start networking because it's the first time you're really having to look for a job. And it's great that you're thinking about looking for a job through a network as opposed to just applying online. This was the biggest thing that I didn't learn until after business school. Entry-level jobs you might get by looking on a job posting, but basically every job post that is all through a network.
Most of them never get posted.
Most of them never get posted. The job I have currently at Bionic, I literally sat next to the CEO at a gala whose friend had an empty table, and she's like, I need you to fill a seat. We started talking, we connected. I said, can I ask your advice? I'm struggling in this thing. We ended up meeting up, and 10 minutes in he goes, you need to leave that immediately and come work for me. And I had a job offer, and they never posted the role. So like that is how you really navigate, particularly more senior roles. But thinking about building a network at 45 or at 25, I think it's all very very similar.
Are the same.
I think in particularly in 2017, 2018, people are so accessible, and not everyone has an online brand. Not everyone is putting themselves out there, but you can find the people who are, and if you yourself feel comfortable doing that, I would suggest that you put yourself out there, right? Think about how you are coming off. Even if you don't have a ton out there, when I Google you, I'm going to see your Instagram photos, or I'm going to see your Twitter, or your LinkedIn, certainly your Facebook if it's not private. Have a good sense of what people are seeing when they Google you. That's your homepage. That's your resume now. And if you don't like what you're seeing, start putting stuff out there, whether that's writing on Medium or writing on LinkedIn. Anyone can post there now. But be really thoughtful about what you're putting out there. And I think this is a challenge for multi-hyphenates, because you have to decide. This is why you have a website. It's why I have a website. It's really hard when you do a lot of things to be able to craft the narrative that says, I'm multi-hyphenated, not I'm flighty.
Right.
And it's hard to craft that in any individual post.
Right.
Or even if you look at my LinkedIn, you're kind of like, what was she doing?
Right.
So I have chosen to build a website that says, I'm going to tell you my story on my terms.
Right.
and I'm going to lay out the pieces of who I am and why these things fit together, to make sure that that's the story that you're understanding about me, as opposed to like the one-off, you know, post or the resume that you might not know how to translate.
Well, I want to give a couple more tactical things for, is it Blake? Thanks, Blake, about this. One is, again, the age doesn't really matter. Certainly you're going to have different peers with different access to things that might be useful, but your peers are your network. So that's fantastic. You already have that. And outside of all the digital stuff, human real life stuff has never gone out of style and never will. Right. Like that's the thing that's always going to be an important component, because you can really demonstrate who you are in person. You can build real rapport very quickly in person. So I'm not sure where you're located based on your question, but depending what field you're in, go to associations for your industry, go to chambers of commerce events, go to, like, we have Network Under 40 and Network Over 40 events, or be the person who convenes people, which gives you exponential influence and your reputation grows leaps and bounds. So if you want to host little dinner parties, you don't even have to pay for it. You just invite everyone and bring a great group together where they're getting value from knowing each other, or you just do some activity, or you host an event, or whatever the thing is. That puts you in a really great spotlight where you're not introducing yourself to every single person, but instead everyone's like, that's Blake and he's the guy I need to know. Yeah. And then secondly, there's an opportunity to be really real with your network, frankly, and be vulnerable and say, and this is something else maybe I'll get Sarah to share if she's able, is another post that I wrote for Forbes on the best email I've ever gotten. It was actually from my cousin when she closed down her startup and was going to seek a job. And instead of saying, I want to work in nonprofit, she wrote me this amazing email that detailed what the things she wanted to do tactically were, where she wanted it to be, salary range, what she wanted the company to stand for. So in my head, I'm literally ticking down like, no, yes, 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 no, 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 no. Like, here's the introductions I can make for you. And it's a perfect rubric for you to send to people in your network who you trust. Yes. To say, this is exactly what I'm looking for and also what I'm not looking for. And are there any introductions you can make? Yeah. Or if you don't want to go to that depth, or you don't know, or you're not comfortable, to just start with the lowest hanging fruit with people and say, this is what I know and this is what I don't know. Can you make an introduction to me to one or two people who fit into X, Y, Z? Yeah. And just start having informational conversations with people. People are generally, like Christina said earlier, very open to help, but generally, unless you can specify, they're just sort of lost and don't know how to do that. So the more you can do all the legwork for someone, whether it's writing an email blurb that someone can use to introduce you and take the work off of them, or make it, whatever the thing is, just cut the work out for someone else and tee yourself up for success that way.
I would also say, and we're kind of out of time, but the last thing I would say is you would be surprised how bad most people are at all of these things. You don't have to be amazing. You just have to be like a B-, right? Like, you write a good email that you've proofread. You attach all the right attachments. You think about, hey, if someone's going to introduce me, they're going to need my resume. And maybe if my resume is non-traditional, they're going to need a couple of sentences to describe how all these things connect. I'm going to provide them before you ask for them. I'm going to follow up with a thank you once you do that. Always. When they make the introduction, I'm going to actually follow up and schedule the email and the phone call. I'm going to make sure to follow up on it and then let that person know how that introduction went. So they have feedback for the next one.
And they know that they can trust you with their reputation because they open a door for you and they know that you're a person who follows up and follows through.
So many people drop these balls along the way that says, I'm not going to spend more social capital on you because you just made me look really bad to this other person.
Exactly.
You're not someone I can trust. So, like, just doing the work is showing up is like 90% of the battle.
Do you want to answer? Let's look at this last one. And I apologize to Jody because two Jodys. Well, there will be a recording. We said that at the beginning. That'll come out once it's available through the Emory Alumni Association.
Yeah, it'll be on YouTube on their channel.
Yeah, and then they're going to send it out to anyone who registered. Was there another question?
It's just Jody can relate.
Thanks, Jody. And then I think because we're out of time, we want to say thank you. And also I'm going to read my Emory responses that I have to give. So if you have any further questions, then you can contact us or anyone who works for Emory on Emory Connects, like we already shouted out, which is Emory's new exclusive online platform for career networking.
I need to get on that.
Sure do. Let's be friends on Emory Connects. There's also an app, so if you're on mobile, then you can do that. And then you can check out other upcoming career programs because there's a lot of these at alumni.emory.edu/career. And yeah.
And if people want to follow you on Twitter and read where you're writing, how do they find you?
Oh yeah, I'm Darrah B everywhere. So DARRAHB, or Darrah.co is my website.
Nice.
How about you?
I'm CM Walla, which, fun fact, was my Emory email address.
Back when LearnLink was a thing.
Yeah. It just became my online brand. So I'm CMWALLA on everything, or ChristinaWallace.com.
Yeah. Well, cool. It's so nice to be here with you guys virtually. Thanks for the feedback and questions.
Yeah.
We hope this offered some value and does into the ether and the universe when this lives on Emory's YouTube. And with that, happy holidays, everybody. I know this is not going to be the holidays for all of you when you watch, but it is right now.
It is. Good luck. You can do this.
Yeah, we believe in you.
Bye.